Hello students, welcome to EPG Patsala. I am Dr. M. Mahalingam from Center for Policy Analysis, New Delhi. Today we are going to discuss about the module Integration Issues in the Hostlands, Southeast Asia and Fiji under paper Sociology of Indian Diaspora. This module tries to illustrate the process of migration and formation of Indian communities in Southeast Asia and Fiji and describe the adaptation, integration and assimilation process Indian communities in Southeast Asia and Fiji, reveal the nature, structure and characteristics of Fiji and Southeast Asian societies in colonial and post-colonial times, discuss what are the integration issues and their present status of Indian communities in Southeast Asia and Fiji, analyze the socio-economic, cultural and political process within the Indian communities in Southeast Asia and Fiji at present. The presence of Indians in Southeast Asia has had a long history spanning the various phases given its geographical proximity to India. The imprints of Indian culture can be discerned from the antiquities of the past. The spread of Hinduism and Buddhism had an influence on the development of language and religion in the region, and the continued popularity of epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the magnificent stupas in Borobudur, the Prambanan temple in Yogyakarta, and a strong presence of Hinduism in Bali remain testimony to such connection with India. The movement of Indians to Southeast Asia has persisted since pre-modern times, throughout the colonial times till the present age of globalization. The emergence of Indian diaspora is thus the result of numerous successive movements of unskilled, semi-skilled and skilled Indians into the region. Their descendants later emerged as Indian ethnic minority communities in the Southeast Asia. There is a strong presence of Indian community in various parts of Southeast Asia. Their size is small in countries like Philippines, Indochina, present-day Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, Indonesia, Thailand and Brunei. But they are more visible and constitute a significant ethnic minority in Malaysia, then known as Malaya, Myanmar, known as Burma today, until the year 1989, and Singapore, given their numerical strength and their crucial role in the development of the region since the 19th century. In the Pacific region, Fiji has had a significant Indian ethnic population which may be traced to the colonial period, endangered migration and also some amount of free migration from India. Unlike Southeast Asia, the Indian migration to Fiji is solely the result of colonialism. Fiji and Southeast Asian societies are plural societies par excellence. After decolonization, these states headed by the natives initiated integration measures in the name of nation building. Given the fact of its civilization and cultural heritage and close proximity to the original homeland, the Indian community as an ethnic minority in these regions responded and reacted to measures unleashed against them in various forms. The following sections would lead into a discussion on these integration measures and the issues pertaining to the ethnic Indian community in present-day Southeast Asia and Fiji. The concept of the plural society. The term plural society is associated with the writings of J.S. Furnival, who was the first to distinguish and identify plural society as a separate form of society. Furnival held that each group holds by its own religion, its own culture and language, its own ideas and ways. As individuals, they meet, but only in the marketplace, in buying and selling. There is a plural society with different sections of the community living side by side but separately within the same political unit. Even in the economic sphere, there is a division of labor along racial lines. M.G. Smith was one of the early scholars who extended, systematized and reformulated the concept of plural society by looking at the varied context of the British West Indies. Smith's theory emphasized political institutions rather than economic aspect as binding the society together. This standpoint of Smith was at odds with Furnivall, who emphasized on economic dimension. Indian migration to Southeast Asia and Fiji, an overview. Although India's influence on Southeast Asia was prevalent prior to the arrival of European powers, there were no Indian settlements as such, since the Indian traders transited and settled between countries to trade their goods. There were few Indian traders who settled near the ports, married local women, and assimilated into the local culture. For example, the mixed progenies that are presently known as Javi Pehen in Malaysia and Singapore. In the beginning, Indian migration comprised religious mendicants, merchants, and traders. The advent of colonialism in the region saw the arrival of the Indian laborers, convicts, imperial auxiliaries made up of the colonial militia and administrators, teachers, and medical professionals. In the 19th century, the colonization of India by the British facilitated the movement of Indians to Myanmar, Malaysia, and Singapore. These countries received large contingents of Indian unskilled laborers and less of the imperial auxiliaries and business migrants. The Indian unskilled labor migrants were assisted through innovative recruitment mechanisms like indenture, Kangani, and Mesri systems in these countries. The Indian commercial class, namely Chulias, who is known as Tamil Muslim traders, and the Nattukottai Chettiars had an extensive network throughout Malaya, Burma, and Indochina, which led to the urban and rural development of these regions. Indian migration to the Dutch colony of East Indies, that is present-day Indonesia, was voluntary and minimal as the British restricted the mobility of Indian laborers to the plantations of Sumatra, though the Dutch encouraged the arrival of Indian laborers. The migration of Indians to Indonesia was largely a spillover from the Malay Peninsula. The nature of Indian migration to Thailand, Philippines, and Indochina and Brunei was voluntary, small, and commercial in nature. Thus, the advent of Indian settlement in Southeast Asia was primarily a result of European colonialism. From the last decade of the 20th century, the interesting migration of Indian human capital, especially Indian professionals for information technology and other sectors, have added to the diversity of Indian community, particularly in Singapore and to some extent in Malaysia. Subsequently, there exists a sense of dichotomy between the old Indians and new Indians within the Indian community in Singapore and Malaysia. In case of Fiji, in the Pacific region from 1879 to 1916, until the abolishment of endangered labor migration, around 60,000 endangered Indian laborers were transported to sugar, banana, and coconut estates of Fiji. The endangered laborers in Fiji were popularly known as Grimitias, which is the derivative word of Grimith, as the term agreement was pronounced by them. Gujarati traders and South Indians arrived as free migrants in the late 19th and early 20th century. Most of them came from northern India, 18% from Uttar Pradesh and 30% from Bihar and Bengal, and the remaining came from southern part of India. The Indian migration to both Southeast Asia and Fiji was initially transient in nature. With the prevalence of conducive atmosphere, the Indians adapted to the new environment and finally settled in the host lands. Later, they obtained citizenship rights at the time of independence and became ethnic minorities in their respective host lands. The Indian community is now in transition as the integration measures are being unfolded under the guise of nation building ever since independence. The following section will deal with the country-wise detailed account such integration measures and the resultant impact on the Indian community. Myanmar. In Southeast Asia, Myanmar, known as Burma until 1989, has a significant Indian ethnic minority. The Indian migrants comprising skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled laborers belonging to various strates of Indian society. For instance, the Indian business community of Chettiars from the Chettinad region of Tamil Nadu dominated the moneylending business in the rural and urban parts of Burma. In colonial Burma, the Indian community occupied all walks of life and barely integrated with the locals as the plural society model was encouraged under the colonial regime. The Chettiars began enclosing the lands of the Burmese peasants who were unable to pay the dues due to the impact of the Great Depression. By the late 1930s, about a quarter of the total agricultural land in Burma was under the control of the Chettiars. The Myanmar Constitution of 1947 did not recognize Indians as an ethnic minority, despite their crucial contribution in the economic development of the country. The Land Nationalisation Act of 1953 led to loss of land ownership by the Chettiars, who received little or no compensation at all in some cases. Following the coups, General Ne Win assumed power and began reorganizing the society on the lines of Burmese way to socialism. This further affected the Indian interests adversely. With the enactment of the Nationalization of Enterprises Act 1963, the Indians lost all their rights over shops, stores, wholesale business, and brokerages. Over 12,000 retail shops owned by Indians were taken over by the government, which resulted in a loss of Rs 15 crores. The exodus of Indians from Myanmar took place a number of times but reached its peak during 1962 and 64. Approximately 150,000 expatriates returned to India, and the government of India sent mercy ships for evacuating Indians from Myanmar. Subsequently, they are not still integrated politically, economically, and culturally and continue to remain as alien or other community in the socio-economic, cultural, and political landscape of Myanmar, which has only multiplied due to the persistent political crisis, religious and ethnic insurgencies since independence. Ethnic insurgencies since independence. Let us discuss Malaysia. Malaysia is a multi-ethnic and multiracial society which has substantial number of people of the Indian community. The Indian community is the third largest after the native Malays and the immigrant Chinese. According to the 2000 census, out of the total population of 21.9 million, Indians account for 7.7%, that is 1.7 million of its population. The term Indian in the census refers to the persons from the Indian subcontinent comprising India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. The Indian ethnic group is fragmented along the lines of class, caste, language, and region. Given the numerical majority of Tamils among the Indians, a sense of Tamilness is asserted from time to time in the realm of culture, religion, and political representation in Malaysia. The policy of racial division of labor was practiced under colonial government in erstwhile Malaya. The Malays were essentially peasants and rice cultivators. A few of them who belonged to an aristocratic background got recruited in the lower ranks of the colonial civil service. The Chinese were either mining, coolies, or middlemen engaged in trade and commerce, and the Indians were employed in rubber estates or public work. Stenson argues that the Indian estate laborers who constituted a large group of industrial labor remained isolated in such a cocoon-like environment. Jain has used Erving Kaufman's concept of total institution to analyze the plantation life of Indians in Malaysia. The insulated or closed plantation life of Indians avoided acculturation with other races and subsequent integration and assimilation. The categorization of races worked to preserve the respective social and cultural identities. At the same time, it also resulted in the emergence of dichotomy between the natives and the immigrant communities in colonial Malaya. The Malaysian Constitution of 1957 is inherently discriminatory in nature as it has enshrined special privileges for the Malays on the basis of Ketunan Melayu or Malay supremacy for being the Bumiputra, which means son of the soil community. This resulted in the subsequent institutionalization of the Malay ethnic identity in the constitution. Article 153 mandated special positions for the Malays and made it the responsibility of the parliament to safeguard it. The special provision includes preferential treatment in the reservation of land, civil service, education, and scholarship, and issues of business permits and licenses for the Malays. Inspired by the constitution, the successive Malaysian governments have implemented the preferential treatment for the Malays since independence. Almost two-thirds of the Indian population of Malaysia has been caught in the vicious cycle of poverty. In order to develop a national culture, national unity, and common Malaysian identity as part of the nation building, successive governments have promulgated integrative policies such as national education policy, national cultural policy, the new economic policy, the Rukun Negara, which means the national ideology, the Bangsa Malaysia, which means Malaysian race concept. The long-serving Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad had declared Malaysia as an Islamic state in the year 2000. The adoption of Islam Hathari, which means civilizational Islam, as the guiding principle of the development planning by the Badawi government further intensified the feeling of alienation amongst ethnic minorities. In the recent times, the gulf between Malays and the non-natives has widened in the wake of growing Islamization, ethno-linguistic and religious nationalism, the growing racialization, polarization, and communalization of society have led to a surge in racial riots in the post-independence era. The racial riots of 1969 and Kambong Medan in 2001 are some classic examples. Apart from economic marginalization, the Indian community has also witnessed cultural marginalization in the recent past when old Hindu temples and shrines were demolished on trivial technical grounds. Malaysian Indian Congress as an Indian political party was formed in 1946 that has been in power since independence as an Indian ethnic partner in the BN on the basis of consociational political system of Malaysia. However, it failed to reduce the plight of the Indians due to the dominant politics of ethnicity and hegemony. In the light of this political vacuum, the civil society group HINDRAF, which means Hindu Rights Action Force, the Hindu rights advocacy group, spearheaded and organized the Indian Spring on November 25, 2007, on the eve of Golden Jubilee year of Malaysia's independence, and confronted the Malaysian state in a bid to highlight the predicament of the Indian ethnic minority in multiracial Malaysia. Recently, the Prime Minister Najib came out with the concept of Satu Malaysia, which means one Malaysia, in a bid to forge national unity amongst the racially divided ethnic groups. This move failed to gain ground amongst the minorities as they regarded it to be an empty rhetoric dominated by racist politics. Though the Indian community has adopted the policy of acculturation in the realms of dress, food habits, and language, the overwhelming practice of institutional racism, repressive measures against minorities, political inequality, and economic inclusiveness has instilled a sense of otherness in the Indians. Singapore. Singapore is a multiracial, multicultural, and meritocratic society consisting of ethnic groups such as Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others. It was founded by Thomas Stamford Raffles, an Englishman, in 1819 and remained as one of the British settlements known as the Straits Settlements, composed of Penang and Malacca. It was part of Federation of Malaysia until its separation in 1965. Due to its geographical location in Southeast Asia and proximity to Malaysia, Singapore has continued to attract wide influx of people from diverse origins. The presence of Indians in Singapore can be traced back since the time of its inception. The Indian migration and settlement in Singapore took place at various points in history. Indian migration produced a diverse community comprising convicts, laborers, imperial auxiliaries, traders, and businessmen. In 2005, the Indian community accounted for around 8.7% of the total population of Singapore. The Indian community remains a heterogeneous unit dominated by ethnic Tamils. According to Hodder, there existed racial and ethnic enclaves in colonial Singapore. The Chinese were concentrated in the congested part of the city, the Malays resided on the western fringes, and the Indians lived in the southern part of the central city and primarily worked in railway and docks. It has been argued that Singapore was a plural society prior to self-government in 1959. The state managed the process of depluralization since 1959 by a slew of policy measures to break down ethnic barriers. As a result, Singapore society enjoys high levels of structural integration and national identity. Since its independence in 1965, People's Action Party, which is PAP, has continued in power in Singapore. The model of cultural pluralism or multiracialism has remained the ideology of PAP, which accords equal status to the cultures and ethnic identities of the various races in Singapore. Indians are found at all levels of Singapore civil service. Tamil is recognized as one of the 4 official languages. Indian popular culture is very much visible in the public sphere of Singapore. The popularity of Indian culture is manifested in the popularity of Little India, the neighborhood in and around Serangoon Road, full of Indian religious, cultural, and commercial institutions, including shops and restaurants. As part of the policy and practice of multiracialism, the adoption of racial ethnic group as the official classification of the Singapore population into 4 categories is commonly known as CMIO, which means Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others. However, it is more than an administrative category which nurtures ethnic distinctions and revitalizes ethnic identity and culture. Further, the heterogeneous population of Singapore that gets subsumed into 4 categories is marked by complex diversity. In addition, many Singaporeans have come to accept the CMIO model, which is racial and is regarded as a reference point in their relation to other ethnic groups. But Singapore remains the only state in Southeast Asia that has successfully integrated all the major existing races into its national culture and identity. Thailand. The emergence of the Indian community in Thailand may be considered as an outcome of various waves of migration. Tamil Hindus as well as Tamil Muslims and Bora Muslims were the early migrants to Thailand. It was followed by the movement of Punjabis, Hindi-speaking Gorakhpuris from eastern Uttar Pradesh, Sindhis, Parsis, Gujarati Sunnis, Pathans, and Bengalis who all belong to different phases of migration to Thailand. The Punjabis are a predominant group amongst the Indian community at present, and 90% of them are Thai citizens. Around 40% of them are Thai citizens by birth. Given the liberal Thai culture and provided an easy access and acceptance into wider Thai society, the process of assimilation is very much visible amongst the Indian community. The Tamil Hindus who represented the first wave of Indian migration to Thailand in the 19th century, have assimilated. Similarly, the Tamil Muslims, the Boras and Pathans have shown different levels of assimilation into Thai society. A study by Lipigo shows that the number of inter-ethnic marriages in the second and third generation have been on the rise. The second generation Indians have taken to Thai language, food, and have adopted the acculturation process well. However, there are some who have maintained their own cultural identity without being part of the acculturation process, and some others who are selectively accommodating Thai culture. Despite the integration and acculturation process of the Indian community being well underway, a complete assimilation is far from being realized due to the geographical proximity and cultural rootedness in India. Indonesia. The Indian community constitutes a minuscule ethnic minority in Indonesia. The earlier Tamil and Gujarati Muslim migrants assimilated in the host culture through inter-ethnic marriages. The Sindhis and Sikhs, given their high economic status, have tried to maintain their socio-religious and linguistic identity. On the other hand, in the case of Hindu and Muslim Tamils and the Gujarati Muslims, the process of integration has been rapid. As the Bhasha Indonesia has been promoted as part of the nation building, Sindhis, Sikhs, and Tamils have shown their concern towards the declining literacy in their respective languages amongst their children. The acculturation process has occurred at various levels amongst the Indian community in Indonesia. Nevertheless, given the diversity of various indigenous ethnic groups, the Indian community has managed to maintain its linguistic, religious, and regional identity despite the ongoing integration and assimilation process with the host culture. Other parts of Southeast Asia. The presence of Indian diaspora is very small in certain Southeast Asian countries, namely Brunei Darussalam, Indochina, and the Philippines. Numerically, the Sindhis are in majority, followed by the Sikhs, who constitute a major group amongst the Indians in the Philippines. The Indian community is apolitical, urban in nature, and given its small size, has been gradually and slowly in integrating socially and culturally with the host state. The Chettiar community may be found in every state of Indochina except Laos. However, the Sindhi community is engaged in business in all the countries of Indochina. The exodus of Indians from South Vietnam took place in the immediate aftermath of the communist takeover. The Indians began leaving Saigon for Singapore. A similar situation emerged in Laos too, which led to large-scale exodus of the Indians. The Indians left Cambodia in 1975 following the victory of Khmer Rouge, who advocated the expulsion of foreign nationals on a large scale. The earlier Hindu and Muslim Tamil migrants assimilated with the host culture of Indochina, while the Chettiars and Chinese chose to maintain their links with India. Overall, given the political instability and a hostile atmosphere towards the non-nationals, Indochina did not attract the Indian community. Fiji is a multi-ethnic nation comprising two dominant ethnic groups such as indigenous Fijians and Indo-Fijians. The arrival of labor market based on ethnicity under the colonial political economy resulted in the advent of classical plural society. Sir Arthur Hamilton Gordon, the first governor of Fiji, laid down the policy of inalienable Fijian rights to land. Indo-Fijians have continued to play a major role in the trade and commerce sector. Population. For the last 34 years, Fiji has witnessed a number of coups led by the indigenous Fijians. Owing to the constant problem of political instability, 4 elected governments were overthrown in the following years: 1987, twice, 2000 and 2006. Fiji's Prime Minister of Indian origin, Mahendra Chaudhry, was deposed in 2000. As a result of military coups, discriminatory legal provisions, and rising fundamentalism, the Indo-Fijian community was forced to leave the country. Indo-Fijians continued to emigrate from Fiji. The 2013 constitution abolished the earlier race-based electoral system and adopted the system of one vote, one value. Despite the democratic transition that has taken place in recent times, the persistence of the Fijian version of apartheid, the non-natives continue to remain landless and as aliens in their adopted land. The Australian historian K.L. Gillion, in his study of the history of Fiji, states that they continue to adapt to the land to which their great-grandparents came. So, students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. The making of plural society in Fiji and Southeast Asia by the colonial powers is based on the notion of ascriptive ethnicity. This notion of ascriptive ethnicity has been used by Taylor to emphasize the essentialist notion of ethnic difference. The colonial policies and practice like the racial division of labor, which is based on ascriptive ethnicity, has led to the perpetuation of ethnic and cultural differences, ethnicization of races, racialization, racial stereotyping in Fiji and other Southeast Asian societies. The colonial discourse on ethnic distinctions such as native and immigrant or local and alien has adversely impacted the ethnic relations after decolonization in Southeast Asia and Fiji. Thus, the process of racialization of Fiji and the Southeast Asian societies is well rooted in colonial past. Racialization in colonial society, however, is not same as racialization in post-colonial society. After decolonization, the dominant or majority native groups in Fiji and other countries of Southeast Asia have tried to politicize the ethnic cultural differences and identities and have appropriated it for seeking privileges. Thus, the dominance and hegemony of the majority native population towards the minority other appears in all the areas of social, political, and economic life in Fiji and Southeast Asian states, except Singapore. Under such circumstances, the process of integration of the Indian community in those states has remained inconsistent and contradictory. A complete assimilation, despite a range of integrative and assimilative measures by the host state, remains impossible due to the rich civilizational and cultural heritage and geographic proximity with India. Thank you.